and we can spend time thinking about the use of space, the editing, the graphics, the the depth, the use of invention of sort of animation and mixed with real space. The idea of having an accumulation of numbers, because that is exactly how black bodies get seen in militarized spaces as numbers. Welcome, Lee. Good to see you. Um, but uh, and the idea then that it also mixes keywords, mandatory minimums, three strikes, SB 1070, militarization, mass incarceration, with images of crowded prisons. Um, so what we have is on one side a deep humanization, and on the other side the way that we're able um, to see the number and then the graphic next to it, or the graphic soon thereafter, of bodies in a slave ship that come before and after the same bodies imposed on the American flag, not with the number of stars per state, but the representation of the graphic display of millions of bodies on that flag. So it's incredibly beautifully made and well put together. Um, and yet we could also offer deep critique. There are a few mistakes that are made statistically, et cetera, in the film. Um, but rather than stay with those things, what I'd like to offer us, because we have such incredible guests with us, James Monteiro from Reentry Campus, David Heppard from Freedom Project, Lee Blake from New Bedford Historical Society, and Gail Forts, I'm sorry, from the YWCA. We have wonderful experts in our midst. Let's let them um, have a conversation where we begin to understand the importance of this film for their daily lives, for the work they do, for all of us in our daily work. A guide, for instance, to how we can think about this film and to understand its immediate relevance. Is it is it still covering the topics we need to cover? Do we need to go further? So we're going to begin to ask these kinds of questions about the content of the film, and I think I'll start with Gail and James and David. You all do work in the problematic language of reentry programs. How does it feel to watch this film? Who I'd like to, James, let's have you go first.
For me, the film was it always every time I watch it, always starts to elicit emotions inside me. I'm somebody who's formerly incarcerated. I spent approximately 20 years of my life incarcerated up and down the East Coast. When it starts getting to the periods of 1985 under the Reagan administration, 1990 with the Clinton administration, and the Bush administration, I could see myself behind the walls, experiencing this big boom in the prison population. So for me, it's like you go through things. I was 18 at the time. You go through things, you go through traumatic events in your life, and what makes it traumatic sometimes is you have no words for it. You have no voice. You know something's wrong. You know something's going on. You know you're caught in the middle of something, but it's like you're inside the frame. So it's kind of hard for you to get a visual for it. So for this, when I see this, it kind of takes me outside of the frame for a moment and it gives me a visual, whereas though I can see myself inside it and what I was, not only what I was going through, but a majority of the people from my community went through. I saw the transformation and the devastation, especially that drugs um, did on our community. So let's what it does to me.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
David.
No, I appreciate that, James, for putting that piece into space because that's so real to really speak about seeing outside of it. I look at it from like because we live in a society that believes in this individualistic society. Pull yourself by your bootstraps. If you work hard and you do well, then you'll be successful. And if you don't, it's because something you've done, right?
Right,
And
right.
so I really, really like appreciated the fact that they did take us wider out and understand the systemic nature of this issue. Even when I was going through it, I'm formerly incarcerated. I went in when I was 16. I came out when I was 41, right? They tried to throw me away. And laws change is the only reason why I'm here today, being able to speak. I was supposed to be in there for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? So I've been impacted in such a way. But through that process, especially earlier in my process, before I was able to heal and show up authentically, I bought into the same line of thinking that it was me. Listen, like I made my bed and now I need to sleep in it, and not really acknowledging all these other systemic forces and the trauma and all these other things that inform my decisions that created the circumstance for me to make bad decisions that had me thrown away. But so I really appreciate the film for that piece of really talking about the systemic nature of the problem and pulling back, because at the end of the day, not being able to see our humanity is the issue. That's the issue from with when we were enslaved, when our ancestors were kidnapped and taken over here for economic reasons, and with Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, through every era, through mass incarceration, their inability to see our humanity is the reason why this stuff is acceptable. And so, being able to understand that there's systemic reasons of why these things are contributing to the problem allows for people to take a step back and see the humanity of the people that have been caught up in this system.
Gail, how are you responding to all of this?
Looking at this from a provider's perspective, one who works with women, some of which have been incarcerated, and looking at it, I mean, everything that was just said by the former two panelists from the systemic view, but then you see the hopelessness, the despair. In working with women, we run 2 residential programs for women. Some are on parole or probation. Some have been not incarcerated, but substance abuse, and different other issues that led them to this, and seeing how it's just a cycle. It's on that wheel that they just cannot get out of, and the way the system is set up, there's no hope. So they fall back into whether it's drugs or different choices, and we're trying to help them, but there's just so many things. You know, they have a bad quarry, can't get a job, can't get housing, can't do this, can't do that. So, you know, what's the point sometimes? And just seeing how, you know, from the inside, how people are treated, as you said, how inhumane, as animals locked up in cages, no windows, no food. So what is there to live for? What is there to come out for when everything is set up against you? So it's so challenging to encourage and support women that we work with to do better, to make those changes when the system is knocking them down every chance they get. So you're never forgiven. You know, you're never able to move on in society because you have those strikes against you. So it saddens me. But you know, I see how difficult it is, you know, for them to move forward because of sometimes something that they did when they were young, which was they can't get past it.
Right. I seem to remember and there's a brilliant documentary, Sisters in the Struggle, and they were talking very much about the same kind of, you know, of police shootings of Black women in this case. And one of the panelists there, one of the interviewees there said, you know, our children aren't allowed to make mistakes. You know, children are supposed to be allowed to make mistakes. That's how we learn. You learn through play and growing and making mistakes. You fall down, you pick yourself up, you figure out how to walk, right? And so it struck me as you were talking that not only are we not able to encourage the visuality, being seen as human, but then we're, as people, not allowed, even with each other, even within our families historically, we're not allowed to make mistakes. we get encouraged even by our parents. And I'm
Mhm.
sure you all know what I'm talking about, where you are encouraged by your auntie, your uncle, your whoever it is, your guardian, your, whoever it is, to act right in public. Don't move to the left or to the right. You're going to stand still in that line, and you're going to, you can't make mistakes, and which means you can't be a child. Lee, I know that you have a lot of history. When we talked before, you said you worked in New York City, and in part during this time. How does the film strike you now in looking at it?
I have an interesting historical perspective,
Yeah.
and goes back to what David was talking about, is that 13 really shows the whole history of how the law and order movement in this country is built up, starting from um, seeking to bring back fugitive slaves to the plantation, to working on Jim Crow, Reconstruction. You see the whole period of time where what was happening is that you have the white plantation owners, the northern plantation owners, forcing black people to work for almost nothing to build their wealth. And you get to see that, first of all, in the 19th century. But in the 20th century, what you start to see is how our elected officials use law and order over and over and over from different administrations
Hmm.
to oppress people of color, oppress Latinos, African Americans, to take our drug laws. And I think the whole piece on Ronald Reagan was really very instructive, because that's where a lot of the um, cocaine laws start, where you have crack baby laws, you have laws about how crack is going to be prosecuted, but cocaine, which is a white collar crime, is not going to be prosecuted that way. And
Hmm.
this also involves how women are treated, because Reagan really talked a lot about welfare queens. Women weren't doing anything. They were having crack babies so that they were smoking crack. And that's really where, and Gail, and I know you know a lot of this, how they kind of pushed women into the whole prison system, and
Mhm,
how
mhm,
they were really exploited behind gray flannel suit and cocaine.
Hmm.
mhm, mhm,
So
I
for
don't
me,
know if
the
you.
whole perspective, that whole period of time, people have to see how this is knitted together, and also how our elected officials build on it and pivot whenever they can. And unfortunately, we have a new law and order president now who's using white supremacy around law and order.
Unabashedly so. Unabashedly so. You bring this up, and I think this is a good time to mention. I've offered all the praise for the film, and I really honestly think that any work that is important and that arrives at such an important moment, a work of art can withstand certain kinds of criticism. And we're not going to sit here and point out, nitpick all the little things that might have not been done to anybody's taste, or that might have been incorrect, in fact, because there are her articles that I found suggesting that there are different inaccuracies. Not many, but they're there. What I do want to ask about is the absence of women, the absence of queer bodies, the absence of trans women in the film. What do you think?
Well, as I told you, Cooper, when we spoke, I mean that was obvious. That I think it was maybe one or two, women that was shown, and what went to jail for one offense. I can't remember her the young lady's name that was speaking. But as Lee said, when you go to the Reagan era and further on of the women going to prison, as well as the women that are left behind, the women that are mothers and their sons are in prison, the
That's right.
wives
And
raising
all those
children,
grandchildren.
all grandchildren, wives raising children by themselves or partners, sisters, friends. Like you're not seeing that piece of how that affects the families that are trying to advocate for their sons, husbands, to come out of prison, and how that breaks apart the family. because now you have, the male is in prison, or the female, is in prison, and now the lack thereof of what that's bringing into the family. So then you have, the single mom, there's a single mom raising, or the 3 baby daddy, or et cetera, et cetera. Oh, is he in prison? Is he dead? You get those comments about, where's the baby's daddy, that type of thing. So you get that stereotype. And you get to the part that, people believe it. They see, they believe what they see on the media, or what they see on social media, TV. So it's that stereotype that people fit into. Or, you're living in housing, you're going to, bring your kids to see their daddy in jail. So that whole piece, which is important, the whole family structure. So by doing that, it just took apart, the families. So that way, children grew up, without parents, like Lee said, grandparents, aunts, uncles, children, foster care system. I mean, it doesn't even talk about all the children that are growing up in foster care that now, don't have a family unit, have suffered trauma, sexual abuse, domestic violence. I mean, I know that with a lot of the women that we work with, and hearing their stories, something happened to them, usually as a child, that led them to these circumstances. So I always say, sometimes as adults, we mess up children. Children are innocent. They are born not knowing anything. It's what we do to them that leads them to these decisions. Every single woman that we've worked with, every single one, you can trace it back to something in childhood, that led them, down this path. So that part, for me was missing, because it's just a part that's not talked about. And as you said, the LGBTQ, community as well, was not addressed, at all, that I saw and I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that those are important issues and they need to be highlighted. I absolutely think they need to be highlighted. I think where my input comes is the fact that I don't know if they all should be highlighted in the same project per se, because of my understanding about focus and how a situation, and when you put a lot of different issues into one project, how that takes away the energy from all those are very important issues that need their own particular projects. They need to be highlighted in their own right, because those are all complicated issues, right? So I think when you put a lot of different issues together, you lose steam on everything, right? You try to say a lot of different things, you don't say the thing that you need to say. I think that the impact on Black men in this country of the 13th is very deliberate, intentional, and devastating to our community. And so I think that it is a story that needs to be told. You know what I mean? But I just don't think, I think all those other issues are important too. I always want to hold space for focus and making sure that a story is told right and told by those who are most impacted by those by whatever the issues are.
If I could just jump in, I agree with you.
Yes, go ahead.
And part of the reason I'm here as a historical society, the New Bedford Historical Society tells the story of Black people. Our historical society in our city only told the story of white people. So they were always propagating negative stereotypes about people of color. So I am an educator. I wanted our young men and our young women to know how important African Americans, Cape Verdeans, Native Americans were in this city. So we do public art, we do mural projects, we do after school programs, but we also do collaborations with adults. So just as you say, our focus is to make sure that young people are educated about how Black people changed this city. And we do that with the Y and a number of organizations, but that's our focus. So when there are collaborative projects like prison projects, sometimes we go to the local jail and we do Black history programs. But our focus is Black history, because I think that the image of Black men and women in this country, it is calculated to make us look bad and to lose our humanity.
I would absolutely have to agree. It is. I mean, having taught quite a bit of this work, it is fascinating to me how shocked my predominantly, often, they're mixed race, but predominantly white group of students are, every time I bring to their attention, that thing that you like so much is actually framed against a certain set of people. And if we even just go to cartoon images, or we go to the ways that comedy has historically been shared in the United States, right? The idea that you have the quote unquote the coon um, as a comedic figure who's always making mistakes and stumbling and needs to be corrected by that corpulent nanny, his supposed wife, who takes care of the children. Um, these are images that persist and need to be unpacked. And then you have this deeply pernicious um, set of very deliberate engagements that get unpacked to some extent in this film, where you get to hear the stock footage, right, of um, apparent lawmakers deliberately creating laws, deliberately setting up um, black and brown bodies as criminals,
Mhm.
right? And using the history of that to their advantage.
The fastest growing prison population in the United States right now, I don't know if people are aware of this, is the female population. They are the fastest growing prison population. And there's a saying that somebody told me a while ago that really struck out to me. It's that when a man goes to prison, he asks, "Where's my lawyer?" When a woman goes to prison, she asks, "Where are my children?"
Okay.
And when we're talking about incarcerating women, we're really talking about the effects that has on the next generation. Um, and to see, well, the two females that ring out to me in the film are like two of my most favorite of all time, and that is Asada Shakur and Angela Davis. I would say my aunt, one of my aunts reminds me of Angela Davis. And Asada Shakur's book is like one of the books that I've read that I just couldn't put this book down. And I don't know of any man that I've grown up with or known or read about that has the strength of this woman. To emphasize them in the movie, I can understand where as though it could kind of I think what we need to do is, and I learned this when I was incarcerated, was in Baltimore, how there was divisions. You had Bloods, you had Crips, you had BGF, you had DMI, and the yard was really sectioned off. You really couldn't go in certain sections of the yard. What I realize is that's what makes us weak, is when we're sectioned off into Christian or Muslim or upper class or lower class. And I think in these type of instances, with the Black Lives Matter movement, it is very important for us all to get together, and not divide ourselves into or compartmentalize ourselves in these movements. We want to bring all facets together. We want to bring women, men, LGBTQ community, everybody together as one fist, or fingers that make a fist in one movement. And when we start separating movements within movements, we actually, I think, weaken the movement.
I think that he's absolutely right. I think that the splintering off um, can take the steam out of a movement. Um, I do think that when in the telling of the stories of these issues, though, I think that they probably need that focus. But as a collective, I think we absolutely need to come together so that we
Right.
can work
Right.
to dismantle the problem. Because the problem, somebody in the community, Mary Flowers, very amazing sister in the movement, and she talks about how, like, well, you think that you're in criminal justice reform, and you think you're in the health care system reform, and you think that you're in education reform. The reality is, if we can't see how all these things are connected, then we'll never be able to solve the problem.
I agree completely. And, I'm very focused, but I'm also focused because working in education with young people and older people is how you stop the pipeline to prison. You have to make sure young people have options, that they know what's available. our communities have to work more with young people to help them have options. And options are education, options are learning job trades, apprenticeships, but also learning how to be a good human being. And you don't learn that in our public schools.
And that's true too, Lee. But I think that we do need to give them options. But I think we really need to talk about how systemically that pipeline is constructed,
That's
right?
right. I agree.
Because them pushing our kids into these into what is it? Man, I just missed it. But into to these special programs.
Right.
Trades or whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. Them doing that is probably the key component of how this pipeline works, right? They criminalizing our kids and getting them institutionalized and set up for prison by talking about how they have a diminished capacity because the school is culturally responsive enough to deal with our kids.
Right.
And then they suggest as well that they're not equipped to do so. Our kids are special to begin with, so that even if you have an individual education evaluation, right?
Well, that's special ed, which has always been horrible.
Right. And yet, at the same time, getting an IEP or getting an evaluation for your child, if they have particularly unique learning, is incredibly important. The problem is then, in addition to that, that they get added to a column that suggests, well, they're not like, Daquan isn't like Timmy, because Daquan has the same symptoms of ADHD or ADD, but Timmy, his parents know how to take care of him, and Daquan, his parents don't. And so Daquan then gets railroaded from pre-K to prison, right? And that the disservice that happens to that child happens before that child even walked into the school, because this preconceived notion of who this child and their parents and their family is going to be. That kind of vilification is demonstrated incredibly well in the film. Is that, I guess my question is that version of the story relevant, or do we need to take it further? Is there more? It has been 4 years, right, since the film, the entire Trump administration, God help us. So is there more to this story that we need to continue now to move forward?
Okay, yeah, I is there more? Absolutely. I think there's more to be told about this story. I think that you know what I think about significant about the movie? We all understand about the 13th and about Emancipation Proclamation, all that. We understand about Abraham Lincoln signing it, but I think what's really prevalent to me or significant to me was when he signed it. He said if he can save the Union without freeing the slaves, he would.
That's right.
And so that informed me that that was what they do in legislation and what they do in Congress all the time. Is that wasn't an accident that the 13th Amendment was written like that.
Right.
He understood the ramifications of that. And I think that that's what's happening now. When you see legislation go in, that's still happening to this day, is where there's all these carve outs. You know what I mean? And you can see a bill that they're talking about how mass incarceration is a racial equity issue. But when this bill comes out the other end, it doesn't affect anybody that looks like me. They're talking about nonviolent drug offenders, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think that it doesn't really tell the story of the magic trick that they did on us. The fact that oppression is evolving and it continues to evolve into what it is today. And the second part, I think that I have a problem with the movie, when they're talking about a conversation. We need to have the conversation about race, and we need to have this conversation. Well, listen, right now, everybody's having the conversation. I think we need to stop having the conversation and start doing something about this stuff. I'm tired of talking about it and doing the emotional labor of educating people about how this system has impacted us as a community. And now I really want some tangible deliverables.
That's right.
Right. Right. That's right.
So I don't know. I've been around a long time. Actually, I was working in New York City during the Central Park joggers issue. I was working City Hall then. I've been around a long time, and I hear we need to have a conversation. We need to talk about this. Well, when are you going to do something about all the reports that come out? When are you going to do something about the conversation? And right now, I am hopeful because we have young people who are leading the Black Lives Matter movement. But I want to see things happen. I want to see action. And I'm with you on the conversation. I've been through so many over the years, and it's incremental change, and I'm like, I'm like tired of it.
I like data points. One of the things that I had read, we started to create this thing here in Rhode Island called the Formerly Incarcerated Union, and the whole premise of the Formerly Incarcerated Union is to bring us together to help those who are coming after us. One of the things we used to do when we were incarcerated was when somebody would come into the block or the dorm that was new, I would take my laundry bag and pass it around, put like a soap or some shower shoes, and then I'd pass it to the next individual and ask him or to put something in it. And if he had something, or if not, pass it on to the next one. And it would go around the block and until it came back to me, and then I would give it to this new individual, and that would be their starter pack. Because we know when somebody's incarcerated, it's going to take them at least a month or two to be able to get themselves some basics such as cosmetics and stuff like that due to money being sent up. And the premise was to create the same sort of system outside. There's enough of us out now that have gone on to become successful. How do we take our collective resources, put them together, and instead of helping the individual coming inside the prison, help the individual who's coming home? 30% of the United States of America has a criminal conviction. There are actually more people in the United States of America that have a criminal conviction than voted in the Obama election. And if that means if we could find a way to bring these numbers together, we actually have the power to determine who the next president of the United States is. So we need to figure out a way to come together, because my thing is never wait for somebody to do for something for us that which we are fully capable of doing for ourselves. And as long as we're going up against this system, right, the more we push up against this system, we are going to continue to receive pushback. And my thing is, how do we, and I take a Malcolm approach, I guess, how do we begin to collectively bring resources amongst each other and help those who are coming after us? This movie just exposed a lot. And again, it brings a lot of emotions and feelings up for me. But one of the things that it really brings up for me the most is that if we have a president who says, I signed something into law that I know was wrong. I know that was wrong. So you know that you've affected this many lives, and that was a wrong thing to do. Yet there's nothing that's been done after that. There's no type of corrective action that has been done after that. And I believe until we figure out how to come together collectively and not ask, but demand something to be done about it, I think we'll continue to get the same outcome.
It sounds very much like, and I'm hoping that you can hear me better. I've been hearing that my mic is not necessarily, my computer needs a new computer. Sorry, guys. Academics don't make money, you know. It sounds, James, like you're talking about a de- or anti-institutionalization of an entire group of people, right? So that here we are, understanding what happened. Works like this can offer us information. We can have conversations, and they're important. I think this is an incredibly important conversation. You know, we have 5 people of color sitting down. I'm assuming we all identify as of African descent, And here we are in community with each other from our different walks of life, all aiming to make change together. And I take your points that now we need to move forward. Well, as somebody who's Canadian born, I'm not allowed to vote. So, and I have a green card. I'm not an American citizen, because that costs peso to become an American citizen. It is quite expensive, that process. And I am also, I use the pronouns they, them. So I have to be very careful about what I put on my ID, right? I'm a masculine presenting assigned female at birth person. Part of Black community, part of queer community, there is the overlap. And I exist in a prison system. And it strikes me that also what you're talking about is the need to recognize that those people who as you beautifully put in our conversation at one point, James, who walk the bridge between prison and not in prison, but continue to exist as part of community. Those people, however they identify, need to be recognized as whole human beings, not 7/8, not 5/8, not 3/4, as whole functioning human being, restored to voting rights, restored to being able to get jobs, restored to a world that already was gunning for their failure in the first place. So not restored back to the prior existence, but restored now to what they aspire to.
Yes, absolutely.
You can do what you can do one of these. You can snap. I was thinking about, I mean, part of what you were saying also, and I know we talked about this in preparation for this conversation, was this language of reentry. That's where I loved what you said when you were talking about the bridge, the remaining in community, and the bridge between prison and world outside prison, and whatever that's going to be. The language, however, of reentry, and the language of what David, in our conversation, you reintroduced me to that article that is oh my goodness, that addresses the nonprofit industrial complex. I think about those two things together, and wonder about this language of reentry and how we are going to unpack its meaning.
When I think about the language of reentry, I think about that nonprofit industrial complex. I think about the origins of prisons. I think about the fact that we've always been othered. I think we've always been. I think that the language and the process of reentry is, and prisons have always been used to strip us away from our rights and resources, and it still does that to this day. I think that's what disappoints me about reentry, because a lot of reentry treats people who are inside, which I think are still a part of our community, um, are a problem to be fixed, or somehow are broken, or somehow, and so I get concerned when the verbiage is around them needing to do better. When I see somebody get released and they go back after 2 months, right? And I know that he tried for 20 jobs, they all said no, 5 places to live, and they all said no. And his ability, his stamina ran out. Somebody on the outside looking in look at it like, listen, this is what they do. You know what I mean? Like that wasn't his first, second, and 30th option was to get a job, to get housing, to get stable, take care of his daughter. But when all those options were taken off the table, you know what I mean? He had to do what he felt like he had to do in those moments. And so I think that in reentry and this system makes us have to be supermen to be successful. You know what I mean? Just think about our conversation with our kid. You know what I mean? The fact of the matter is, you have to be amazing to be able to come shining through there with all those this gravitational pull and influences in place for them to be amazing with all these impacts of a school that's not culturally responsive and doesn't really that's more prone to suspend them and to expel them, that's more prone to push them in programs that are not helpful, that will handicap them, right? That's more prone to diagnose them with some type of ailment or some type of mental issue so you can put drugs in their system, right? They have to be amazing to be able, and then at the end of the day, they say, well, you know what, you could have made better choices. You shouldn't have dropped out, right? And it's the same thing we do in reentry. They talk about, they want people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make good decisions when you don't give them good options.
Right. Absolutely.
Brother, speak. What you got? What you got, James? What you got?
Reentry is coming back into society, and I've heard it termed that prison sometimes is a smaller version of what happens outside, but I will tell you that there's nothing about normal about prison. That is nothing like society. In society, I can go to the refrigerator if I want. I could pick up the phone if I want. I'm not locked in a room 24/7. And the main thing is, like, one of the most oppressive things about prison is the lack of touch, the lack of intimacy. Everything is kept at a distance. There are no relationships. There is no ability to show emotion. And there are very little private moments. So for me, reentering society means I'm coming back. I'm coming back to this world where David is right. There's little acceptance for me. There's little provided for me to come back to. Actually, it's more oppressive than when I left. I have a stigma on my back. Once a criminal, always a criminal. Housing is cut off from me. Employment, I have a record, a criminal record. Licensing, there are all these barriers that are placed on me. And for me, again, I always say that it is important that those of us, I have freedom now. I can say that. I have choices. Prior to going to prison, I had little to no choices. Coming home, I might have been able to get a dishwashing job. I might have been able to get lucky to get a warehouse job. I went back to school when I was incarcerated. I got my GED, I got my associate's degree, I got my bachelor's degree, and I went for a year worth of my master's. And I noticed that when I had come home, I was given two choices. Somebody was willing to give me a bunch of narcotics to sell for them, and somebody else told me to go see an old friend of mine named Barry, who ran the financial aid department at CCRI. And I chose to go see Barry, and Barry had similar circumstances to me. In California, we were in school together when we were young. My grades were better than his, and I'm asking him for help, and he's helping me with my like financial aid papers and all this stuff. And I'm just looking at him like, how the heck did you do that, man? And he's like, what do you mean? I said, how'd you turn your circumstances around like that? How did you flip all that around? Like the criminal record and the background that we came from. And his response to me was, James, the more letters I got behind my name, the less my background mattered. And for me, it was a light bulb moment because, yes, it is true that society will hold us back. Yes, it is true. But the greatest thing that I've told myself is that none of this would work for me. And the truth of the matter is, I have freedom now. I have choices. If I don't want to work someplace, I'll leave in a minute. I don't have to be employed by anybody else anymore. I have financial freedom. And one thing I always say is that once we have that freedom, it's our responsibility to reach back and help others.
That's right.
Right.
And that's what Martin Luther King did. That's what these individuals did.
Right.
I think we need more of the people that, because some of us make it. And we need to be able to look back and help those who are coming up after us. So when I look at reentry, that's what I look at. Helping remove some of the barriers for the brothers and sisters who are coming after me.
Absolutely. Can I say something, Coop?
Please, yes.
I appreciate you sharing that too, bro. Because I didn't want my framing to be like it was this dire. It wasn't, this dire thing when we come out. Even though they put up all these barriers and they created this stigma, right? The reality is community, right? Community is what helped supported me so I can show up in the way that I'm showing up today. It's helped me heal, and it's helped me to be able to show up the person you see today. And what we do in the Freedom Project is we facilitate workshops inside the institutions. We do reentry too, but we facilitate workshops inside the institution. And what that do is create pockets of empathy inside the institution so people can get connected and have community inside the institution. Remember, you said something about Cooper, you said about reentry. The thing about reentry and the language of reentry is it creates this separation, right? Yeah. It's like you actually are out of sight, out of mind, like you don't exist anymore, and then you re-enter society instead of creating circumstances where letting people know that you're still a part of our community, you're still loved, you're still supported. And what's crazy is they did at Antioch University did a study about our workshops, and it lowers recidivism by 43%, right? Wow. Nothing else. Wow. The impact of empathy, compassion, and community has on a person's ability to show up in a way that they wish to show up. Because remember I said that a person gives up after 10, 20, 30, whatever that breaking point was for them, that they felt like they didn't have a chance. When you have community behind you, you always feel like you have a chance. And so I think that's the most important component about reentry. And when you're transitioning back is if you're not going to do it by yourself. I know I didn't. Nobody I know did. It took people to be able to support me and feel like I had a place to come back to help support me in that process.
Gail, I know you do this work as well, and you also talked about some of the work you do with the women who are addicted, have different addictions, etc. And the notion I keep on coming up with is that being made to seem a pariah, even within your own community, also adds to the problem, right? When you have these groups of women who have been stigmatized both within their community and outside their community, how do you and your programs deal with that?
Well, of course, it's challenging, but as just, both the gentlemen said, you have to provide support. And that's, the main thing that we do is no matter what, and they provide support for each other. We have two, programs, 8 women each, and they, have all different circumstances, all different backgrounds, and it's just that supportive network that they know that they have someone, when they're feeling down, when they're feeling hopeless, when they're feeling happy, just to share that and to know that we're here for you. We're not here to judge. We're here to, to support you, to help you find, resources, help you navigate, the system, because we want you to do better. That's part of, our mission, is to empower you to make those choices and to teach you how to advocate, to teach you how to do those things for yourself, as well as, yes, we'll help you, but no, let's help you get your resume together. Let's get to the community college, whatever it is. Each person has an individual plan, case management. Have you talked to your doctor? So they're checking, even during COVID, every single day, whether it's on the phone, Zoom, we got everybody on technology, what's going on? How you doing today? Because, that was a concern. People are in quarantine, people are home. It's really easy to, slip, for lack of a better term. So we just want to make sure that that's the main focus, is that, no judgment. We are here for you. We want you to do whatever is best for you, and they have to support each other, and they do that.
Do you have people working in the Y who have also been through the prison system, much like
we've had in the past? We don't right now, but we have in the past, yes.
And do you feel that makes a difference?
Absolutely, because it gives, they can go for their personal experience, as well, and they're most of the time more than willing to share those, experiences, not only with the, residents, but with the other staff and other, participants that we work with too, is to, to share their story, or, they might have been in recovery, or, been a survivor of, domestic or sexual assault. So, they're, by saying, hey, that happened to me too. It's not, you're not alone in this.
That language of not being alone is so, I mean, having also done earlier work in education, with communities in Harlem, that language of not being alone, that language of healing community, of being able to go that extra yard is so incredibly important. Lee, I wanted to bring you into the conversation because you told me that you used to be part of the Department of Education in New York. Was that right?
So I worked in New York in the 80s, and worked in the Dinkins administration, actually, and really had a lot of interesting conversations at the time, because New York at that time, we were dealing with Giuliani all the time, and all the pushback on crime and violence in New York. And people really didn't want to see a Black mayor start to deal with some of the issues, the reentry issues, the issues around justice, and how we could put programs together that would actually do mentorship, educational training for people who had been incarcerated. So it was an interesting time. And, that's kind of just a few years before all that stop and frisk stuff starts, where people are just, where, the administration is really just looking for ways to lock up young men. And that was really one of the things that I learned, that they were just looking for ways to find small crimes that would put young people in jail, and without any sense of any kind of support system that would help them do their paperwork to get out. It's an interesting thing when you talk about the difference between women going to prison and men going to prison. When men go to prison, they ask for a lawyer. When men go to prison, often there's a legal library that they can use. But when women go to prison, they ask about their children. There's no legal library in a lot of the women's prisons. And that was one of the movements that people began, is that women should have the ability to also look through the law library and figure out what was happening with their case. But it's a subtle difference, but obviously it was a planned difference.
I hate to say that I did not know that. It's interesting. It's not a subtle difference. It is a.
It's intentional. It's intentional.
Yep.
It's intentional. It's intentional.
Absolutely. And what it brings to mind to me is like, well, wait, am I more of an intellectual threat? Like what is happening here? Let's look at it this way, and I am going on a hunch. Just go with me, guys. Correct me if I'm wrong. But if we look at the numbers of women across many races now in college and higher education, it outstrips men.
That's right.
Right.
The number of Black women in college and higher education institutions is so much more higher than Black men. It's absolutely mind-blowing.
That's right.
Right.
And I gotta say, that deliberate denial of access to education for women, I am floored. It's not a benign neglect. Oh, they're more concerned about family. They don't want to learn. They're going to go off and, right? It is a deliberate denial of access to education that you just described that I am now like freshly incensed. I am, I am uh, hmm. I'm also encouraged by how you are all talking about the programs in which you work and the programs you have set up, um, because it means to me that you're recognizing that you are pioneering a dynamic where people are seen even when behind bars,
Mhm.
right? And and that extension of community is at the core of what I've heard all of you say. Um, James, I am so deeply struck by what you said earlier when you were said one of the things that you are denied is touch, emotionality, connection. And I know that some of the programs I ran were about healing, and a lot of the kids I worked with were very obviously loved, deeply loved,
Hmm.
but not necessarily held
Mhm.
emotionally. Yeah, particularly little boys. And that's not the fault of parents. I'm not. Don't get me wrong. That is a kind of socialization. However, I wonder how any of you thinks about the re-socialization, allowing men and women and genderqueer people to think about and feel and come to a reckoning with the feelings they have about being institutionalized, about their histories, about their incredible moment now, their joys, their failures. How does that work out in your programs?
That's an interesting question,
It's a big
Cooper.
question.
It's a big question. I'm just thinking. I mean, it's very difficult thinking about some of the the women that we work with that may have children and their children are elsewhere. They're with grandma. They're in foster care. They're with the dad. They're working hard to get their rights back.
Hmm.
Or or they have families that are not supportive right now because been there, done that millions and millions of times, and they're done. And then we have some that crave love and affection and attention. Sometimes I think more than they need. Um, too, and it's learning what is positive relationships, what
Hmm.
is what's good for you. I mean, everybody is an individual, and I say that to them all the time. That everyone is different, and everyone needs different things. And you have some that do not want don't want that at all. They don't want touch. They don't want, and again, going back to whatever their history is. So I think it's really having those conversations individually as well as in groups
Hmm.
about what's best for you and how we can make that support. I know, again, right now, because we're doing a lot of virtual support groups or by phone, I mean, they're, as James said, they're craving that just togetherness,
Hmm.
that they want to be together in this. And now in the COVID wake of that, of how that's going to change. I
Hmm.
mean, we run childcare programs too that we're opening on Monday, and that's one of my biggest concerns. Kids that have been home for 4 months,
Yeah.
especially little ones, are going to come in and they're going to want to hug each other and hug
Right.
staff, and we
Right.
can't do that. And we can't do that.
Right.
So I think it's going to be a real challenge in this new COVID world that we live in, about how you get to be human and have contact. I mean, I'm sure, we all feel it too. I know I feel it, been with the same four people, for 4 months, you want to,
Right.
I haven't seen Lee in months, and I used to see her all the time, so you definitely miss that. I think everybody misses that. So I think by, again, taking away that from people that are in prison, I mean, you're just stripping away every single right that you have as a person. And it's just punishment over and over and over and over again. So if you've paid your debt to society, quote unquote, and you're coming out, reentry, whatever term you want to use. So why don't you get all these things back? Because you did what you were supposed to do,
Right.
Hmm.
including the right to vote. you know, it's and all of these other things, because you did what you needed to do, supposedly, right? So
Right. Right.
you
Right.
know,
I'm going to ask an inanely uh, in this panel what might be a silly question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway because I'm gonna lean right into you're holding me, right? You're with me, right? Okay. So does anybody know? And I can look it up. I got Google, but I think it's important for this conversation. Does anybody know how it is possible that anybody should leave a prison and still be refused basic citizenship rights?
That's right.
What at what point, what amendment, what law allowed that to take place? Lee, do you know? I'm genuinely asking, at what point did that become the case? Because it strikes me that that's not embedded necessarily constitutionally with the 13th Amendment. So forgive my, expectation of humanity, but at what point did anybody say you're not allowed to vote? You can't change the world around you. Does anybody actually know? Is this something we should look up?
That's also part of the punishment, is to take away your humanity and to take away your right as a civilian, as a citizen. Even though you've paid your debt to society, you're not allowed to vote to change things. But I also think a lot of it has to do with racism, is that so many of the young men at different points in time in terms of Reconstruction were pulled and put in chain gangs. They lost all their rights. They lost their right to vote, which they had just gotten with the 13th Amendment. That's planned.
Mm-hmm.
That is planned.
Right. I think it's embedded in that. I don't think it's
Yep.
I don't think it's clear like as part of a law, but I think that was part of the intention of that amendment. That not only when you go to jail, it's forever.
Well,
Yeah.
there's 2 states in this country you can actually vote while you're incarcerated. There's 2 states.
You see my head, right? I just went.
Anybody knows those states? While you're in prison serving time, there's 2 states you can vote while in prison.
And they both got something in common.
And they both, you know what they are, right, David?
They're like Vermont, and they're very white though. What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
well, I'm just saying.
You want us to guess?
Vermont and Maine.
It's true.
Also Maine. So when the further you go down south and you start to look at red states, you see that more and more voting rights are restrictive. Here in Rhode Island, we got the right to vote back for people who are incarcerated. And actually, what we found out is that people who are incarcerated for misdemeanors can vote. The law does not say that if you've been convicted of a misdemeanor, you cannot vote. The law says if you've been convicted of a felony conviction, you do not have the right to vote. So that means everybody that is in we don't have county jails, but everybody that is in county or holding, right, who are not convicted yet, actually have the right to vote by absentee ballot. Anybody who was convicted with a misdemeanor offense while they incarcerated has the right to vote. It's just a lack of information. And the further and further you go down south to red states, the more restrictive this voting.
That's right.
Right. That's right.
And the reason is because it keeps people in control. It keeps people in
Exactly. Exactly.
I think during Reconstruction, they used to do a lot of intimidation and stuff like that to keep people from voting. And so it's all steeped. Like, I really appreciate everybody voicing about where it's steeped and where it comes from. Like, this is just, these are the ramifications for policies from way back then. It's for the spirit of wanting to disenfranchise and separate a particular group of people from resources and rights.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, and we're actually experiencing this now,
right?
Because the big push for voter suppression across the country, and that is because the demographics are changing. You have more Black and brown people who are able to vote now But at the same point in time, the Republicans, it's mostly Republicans, are trying to figure out ways to keep their positions. And to do that, they suppress our vote. They change the laws. Well, they changed, let's say, the polling places in some communities. Just last week, we had Atlanta. White Atlanta had more polling places open than Black Atlanta. People were banging on the door at 7 o'clock at night because the hours had closed, begging to vote. They'd been in line for hours in the rain.
Right.
In the rain. But that is a tactic. And that is a tactic to keep control of this country and to oppress people of color.
Right. Absolutely.
No,
Agreed.
absolutely.
Agreed.
We've just hit about 6 o'clock on PST. Before we switch out, that is to move on to back to our own workaday, there was one issue that came up. I'm gonna change our direction a little bit. There was one issue that came up that was repeatedly fascinating in conversation with all of you prior to this, and that was very much embedded in the film. And that is the issue of visuality. The issue that this kind of film can create awareness because it allows us to see. And in the film, they talk about the issue of seeing. And at the very end, you see these with permission of the Castile family, with permission of such and such family. I think, Lee, you and I got into conversation about the bravery of Emmett Till's mother, the idea that she insisted that her son's face, unrecognizable as it was, be
14 years old.
14. I'm asking this because we're in a different moment right now. We're in a moment where hopefully it is a new civil rights spark, movement, flow, and visuality is how people have come to understand what's been happening. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about this new moment of seeing and being seen? James, you have.
So you think also of the power of this young woman who videotaped, who with her phone stood over as Floyd was being asphyxiated. We would not know what happened to him. And of course, we get all the lies in the background, but people are much more visual now. And we also have the tools to record things. One of the things that Cooper and I talked about were some of the movies, watching the Freedom Riders films that, because we have new generations of young people, have not been able to see the kind of struggles and fights that people had to go through in order to just ride a bus across the South. So, you know, Stanley Nelson's films, Spike Lee's films, of course, but how important the work that film directors and visual artists are doing now to bring our humanity forward, but also to reconnect and reclaim our history, which is minimized. It's always like we did something, but people did things to us that were just inhumane. And we're at this point now where we have more directors, and I'm so looking forward to people having this whole history laid out so that they understand things better, and they understand things are not going to stop, that struggle continues.
I remember when remember when Martin Luther King, the strategy was that people can see these atrocities, right? And was really brought out by being nonviolent and showing up, and then being seen how they were treated with the fire hoses and the dogs and all this other stuff. And that was successful, right? We've had all these moments in lately of where things have been captured, and it being captured can be a powerful moment, right? But back in the day when they used to lynch or hang, and they used to parade us through the town and do it publicly, right? I painted that graphic picture because if you can have a moment like this where this stuff is all over everywhere, this is traumatizing for us, for me. I know for my community to be able to see this happen to somebody that looks like me, right? It's traumatizing. You know what I mean? But I think it's okay if we get some deliverables, if we can get a civil rights bill that comes through, if we can get some movement, right? But if we don't get no movement, then it's just like that. It's just like all of us having to witness something happen and feeling powerless to this system and to this machine. And it really has the opposite effect of making you feel like this is what happens to you if you step out of line, because now the voices of, well, you know, you need to be doing this, you shouldn't have did this, you shouldn't have, and we start victim blaming, right? And so I'm hoping, my hope is, I'm struggling with the trauma of dealing with so many visuals. I'm dealing with that, right? And I'm dealing with it with the hopes that the people who really do need to see it, and that's the people, because I've been seeing police brutality my whole life, so this isn't nothing new to me, right? But for the people who haven't seen it or witnessed it, that this allows for them to see our humanity, though.
Right.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah.
We have families, we have kids, we have dreams, and we don't deserve to be treated like this or to die like this, right? And so I hope that allows for them to stop saying all lives matter and start pretending like our lives matter. You know what I'm saying? And really give us some deliverables when it comes to, instead of doing what happened every time. Like, we got a real recent history that we can keep on talking about Rodney King, about Trayvon, and we could be talking about, like, this stuff has been it's been Groundhog's Day for our community.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of energy. So I'm just hoping and I'm praying that deliverables come and that actual change happens this time, because maybe it wasn't as egregious as George Floyd. Maybe that's all you needed.
Yeah.
For me, one of the things that stood out in the movie is that we can't talk about Black Lives Matter unless we're willing to address the criminal justice system. And also, one of the things that stood out to me is that how it wasn't just like white people who were turning their backs on us. It was also our own people, like But this here shows that it goes much deeper, as David was alluding to earlier, than the individual. This is not just the individual's problem. And we can't talk about Black Lives Matter unless we're willing to address the criminal justice system and the brothers and sisters who were caught up in the genocide, especially I call it genocide of the 80s and 90s, when our communities were put under war and people were just stripped and snatched away from us. We have to find healing in that. And we have to include these brothers and sisters who are now beginning to come home after these long sentences that were handed down to them. And we have to welcome them with open arms, with all of their wounds and trauma. So I'll leave it at that.
Lee, James, David, Gail, I thank you sincerely for your voices, for sharing space, holding space with each other, for your intelligence and your heart and your passion and compassion for the work you do. It is amazing, and we could continue. Like I just remember saying to you in different correspondence, it feels like, you know, we should be sitting down with a good meal together, and talking, and then creating plans, and then moving forward with a plan and strategizing, because coming together in community, considering the amount of heavy lifting we do emotionally every day, is incredibly important. This is a healing conversation. This is an encouraging conversation. This is a real conversation because we can't forget. We can't just walk away and go, oh, well, that was nice. We're going back to do work. And that is also a reminder that in the film, they showed us people who are doing work. It was nice, it was glossy, it was great for its platform, it did exactly what it needed to do. But it showed people doing work. And the image of Black men being thrown to the ground, flipped over, and naked, being literally stripped down, will never leave my mind. It's there. So now it's there. What am I going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question. You watch a man murdered. We've watched many people, Sandra Bland, many people murdered in front of us. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm leaving you with that. I know, stay strong, stay safe, be well. Now we know each other. We can't unknow each other. Right?
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right? Okay. All right. Love
Love
and
it.
peace to you all. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you. Have a
Good
good night.
Have a good
Take
night.
care.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.